Welcome, James, to Freya's Free Practice Fridays. You couldn't stay away, could you? I mean, you could, you're in London, but missed one podcast and now you wanted your spot back.
I feel like it became too Dutch for my liking. I need to be here to even it all out and be as British as possible as I fly that passport of mine. Today, Tommy T has no say here.
Well, that's fine because I'm still here. And so because of the Dutchness of what has become a real thing apparently, we're going to start with a bit of you've obviously done race review, which is awesome, covered everything that happened which was in a much more exciting race than we thought it was going to be, especially Tommy T. But in terms of what happened, we're going to start with Max, who, in response to a question in the post-race press conference about the atmosphere at Monza, kind of said, oh, yeah, it was a great place to stand, but actually the atmosphere was not the greatest for me. It is what it is. Obviously referring to the booing that he kind of was met with in the face of the excellent anthem and obviously during his interview. Leclerc, when asked and for his opinion on this, kind of said, look, it shouldn't happen, but what can you do? If it was anybody else besides the Dutch, James, would you have a different opinion, and what is your opinion?
Look, I think if the Italians can't even get their own anthem right at the very start of the Grand Prix, then they shouldn't be booing anything. I think if they could just get the basics correct, do the anthem properly, maybe just, I don't know, be a Formula One team properly. They didn't have a good time from a Ferrari point of view, really. The AlphaTauri's doing a better home job than Ferrari. Look, I think it's one of those interesting things, isn't it? We've seen that at the Dutch Grand Prix, anyone wearing Lewis Hamilton merchandise or Mercedes or basically anyone else's merchandise, maybe except outside of McLaren, because you could probably sort of get away with it there. There was reports of unacceptable behaviour there. Now at Monza in the Italian Grand Prix, there's reports of unacceptable behaviour of people Ferrari people basically against everyone else, including Red Bull fans. I think one of the things is it's just a sport team. Like, I know that you get really passionate about it and it's very exciting, but at the end of the day, take your anger out on Ferrari. Don't take it out on other fans. It's not their fault that your team is incapable of winning a world championship.
It's interesting because, like you said, there's no driver that seems to be immune to the wrath of an opposing crowd. But I think perhaps because we have such dominant, couple of drivers, we tend to associate it with a couple of people, right? So obviously we've seen it happen to Lewis. We've seen it happen to Max a few times. But because we have that kind of those dominance, that dominance over the last couple of years with those couple of drivers, we're not seeing if the same would happen to the French, for example, to the Germans, because we're not getting them on the top step of the podium. So you don't really see it beyond that. But I also just think it's interesting from a crowd perspective. We do see it at some other sports as well, and yet others not so much. But it's always just an interesting point to reflect on, I think, in terms of that crowd behaviour and whether or not it kind of puts a dampener on the weekend sometimes. Another person who would have had a dampener on their weekend was Pierre Gasly, who was quite unwell, it seems, and yet still pulled out a reasonable performance. Campy, just saying. But he kind of said, look, I'm better-ish, but I have to say it's been a really rough couple of days for me, just feeling really sick, being stuck at home, really, really weak. So he was just happy to be in the car and be able to drive, because we've seen what can happen if you offer up that opportunity to somebody else. Looking at you, Nick de Vries. Obviously, not Albon's fault or anything he could do about that, but just really interesting for Gasly to kind of say, I'm really glad that I was actually driving.
I think the difference between Gasly and Albon is that neither of them really, their seats are in jeopardy. It is absolutely Latifi and Tsunoda and their teammates who are sort of more freaking out about it. It's been an interesting couple of days since. I'm sure we'll talk about Nick in just a moment, about the offers that now are on the table for him, apparently. But certainly for Pierre, there isn't really anyone in the Red Bull pool, and we've sort of said this a couple of times over the last couple of weeks, that would be a suitable replacement for him. Certainly, I think was probably Liam Lawson would have stepped in if that was the case. And he only drove at the FP1 session in the AlphaTauri in Belgium, so at least he's sort of more up to date with the car. But yeah, I mean, you'd hate to feel that way through any circuit, I guess. But in terms of Monza, maybe when it's less downforce and there's not so many corners as maybe a track such as Singapore, for example, it's slightly easier, which, we have absolutely no idea, do we? But it's slightly easier maybe to feel sick in that instance. But your heart has to go out to Alex Albon and his family and his girlfriend and his friends for the complications that happened at the very end of his procedure, which was a fairly straightforward procedure. I mean, that would have been touch and go for a moment for some of them, I imagine. Absolutely no good. But again, I think it highlights the realities of life versus the sport and how ridiculous fans can get, unnecessarily so, completely ruining other people's experiences of getting to a racetrack. And I mean, they have to queue for hours to get a beer or get a token to get a beer or to get water and don't really see much of the racetrack. So I think the fans need to sort it out. But for Pierre Gasly, absolutely good thing that he wasn't ill, but also probably a good thing for Liam Lawson that he didn't have to step in, because he probably would have been outshone by Nick de Vries anyway, and his shot at Formula One, so to speak, maybe wouldn't have been as bright and shining a star as Nick's was.
Oh, 100%. And like you said, it's that would have been quite an interesting development to have two people doing their debuts unexpectedly at a race. Would have been interesting. But I think still, and we'll talk about Nick in a second, but, at the end of his race, he basically said, I can't move, my shoulders are dead, everything's dead, I can't move, please somebody help me get out of the car, which just gives us that little bit of insight as to somebody who hasn't done the full race distance as to how challenging that was for them. So if you have someone like Gasly who's just under the weather, and we obviously happened with Norris earlier in the year as well, who was really sick, to then still finish in the points, finish in 8th, have some good battles out there as well. Just wanted to kind of pick that up as a pretty good effort, because we kind of got a hint through Nick's radio as to just how hard it is. It's a good reminder for us. So let's move on to Nick. Obviously, you guys, obviously we're talking about just how fantastic he was during the weekend, which he absolutely was, and it was great to hear everybody, including yourself, James, being so supportive of the Dutchman. I think what's interesting as well with him is that when we just in terms of what we're seeing from him at this level is that he's a little bit older than some of the other kind of what we describe as young talents, so to speak. He's 27. And I thought what was great actually about his performance this weekend is that, because he won the 2019 Formula 2 Championship. It shows that if you don't get a drive immediately in Formula One, it's not the end of your opportunity in that sport. It's about what you do with that opportunity if and when it does present. So we've discussed this on multiple occasions, this issue of kind of saying you've got these Formula 2 champions coming through, where do they go when we only have 20 driver seats? And I just thought it was really great to see that, when that opportunity presented, he absolutely just, took advantage of that completely. But it's also just a good reminder that if you finish Formula 2, you can't go back into the championship again, you don't have a seat, that's not the end of the road. Yeah, I mean,
Campy likes to flip-flop in how he thinks about that point, depending on which podcast episode. Last episode he said that there shouldn't be a road to Formula 1 from being the champion of Formula 2. In previous episodes he said that there should be. So classic Lakeside Drive. Let's just flip the decision up, or the coin rather, and see which decision
he
we land
loves gymnastics.
That's actually one of his things. He goes for a swim. He has a bit of a flail in the pool, or as some people
quite
say,
an athletic fellow, really,
with arms going everywhere. Oh, athletic
is his beanie waterproof?
That's
what I want to know.
Doesn't matter. He's got 3 exactly the same. So if one gets wet, he has another 2 in rotation to help that. No, I think for Nick, yes, he was an absolute superstar in 2019. Let's not forget, though, that going into 2020, of course, the COVID pandemic really messing everyone up, of course, in many ways, and you don't need to say that more than once. But for his opportunity of trying to get into a seat in 2020, it was the grid was pretty full, and there was an option, I think, for him to go to Mercedes as a reserve driver or go to Mercedes Formula E team as a driver. And of course, I think you take the drive over the reserve drive role any day of the week just to keep your skills up. And let's not forget, he's a world champion in Formula E now. alongside Stoffel Van Dorn, who is world champion this year. So his pedigree is there, absolutely. You said he's a little bit older, which is a great thing, I think, for many ways. I mentioned this on the previous podcast, but the way that he dealt with the media and how thankful he was to the team and to Williams and everyone else now, I think really shows the caliber of the person that he is and how patient he's been. He definitely shows now that he deserves the drive, more so than probably a few other people who are on the grid existing for next year. But I wonder if it's going to be one of those things now that he's going to go from no options maybe to too many. From what I understand, Williams is really hoping to lock him in, but now there's rumours that Otmar's now looking at him as an option for Alpine too. I think personally, you take the Williams seat and ignore or try and avoid as best as possible the French at the moment for the mess that they're causing themselves. Although he is taking part in a test alongside Colton Herta, which will be interesting to see what happens through that with that Alpine speed, and Jack Doohan, of course, there as well. Wouldn't it be great, though, if out of the three of them, Jack comes along and absolutely dominates them, blowing them all out of the park with an exceptionally fast time, and somehow, magically, we end up with three Australians on the grid, maybe one in a reserve driver role for 2023.
Oh, can you imagine what absolute scenes that would be? And then one day within that three-driver Australian lineup, you'd get an all-Australian podium. That would have to happen. And I'll happily get in the way of any of the Dutchmen who could potentially not make that happen or try.
I'll hold you up to that.
Create hurdles there. Oh, yeah, well, Yeah, no, he did do a great job. And I think what was a real shame is that for a second there, I thought he was going to get into Q3 as well in qualifying. But he explained afterwards what happened there in that he had Nicholas's wheel because it's closer, but then he's used to Alex's switches, and then he bumped something and he lost brake balance, and then he locked up rears going into turn 4, and that's kind of caused him to lose his last run in Q2. But little things like that, you go, when you're just in you've got a completely different setup, let alone the fact that as of, lap 32 or 33 it was, you're in completely uncharted territory. That was the thing for me. I was actually really interested to play out for his race in terms of going, this is as far as you've gone in this car. Everything from here is an unknown. And again, from a physicality perspective, you're entering this space which you don't know how your brain is going to respond to. So, and I think Max actually put it pretty well afterwards in terms of saying, look, yes, the fact that he walked away with points was incredible, but actually all he had to do that day was get through lap 1 without getting into trouble, finish the race, not finish last, and everyone would have been impressed. But the fact that he did the performance that he did was very impressive. One other thing I just wanted to mention, which was I think just something could be a bit of fun, is that Sebastian Vettel will be making an appearance in Race of Champions next year. The other person who was announced for that, of course, was Chadwick. So obviously, as we all know, we've mentioned a few times, Vettel will, the end of his season. I haven't quite come to terms with that. I think in the same way that, with some other just characters that you love seeing on the grid, the fact that he won't be there next year in his scooters with his headbands, picking up the rubbish is, something that will be dearly missed. But it could be a lot of fun. I think it's at the end of January in Sweden. So we'll see him alongside Jamie Chadwick, as I mentioned, Johan Kristoffersen, Mika Häkkinen. That could be a lot of fun. Obviously, he's raced in it before, and he's kind of described it as being a really special event, a lot of fun. And I think that would be a really nice move for him after Formula One to kind of go, I'm just going to go and do something that is good fun. I'm racing in snow and ice. I don't really know what I'm doing there. That's going to be pretty interesting. And he'll also, but he's still in a car. Are you looking forward to that?
Yeah, he's going to be beaten by Sebastian Loeb, so there's almost no point turning up, I think, for anyone else except for Sebastian Loeb for the event. That's generally what happens at Race of Champions. It happened this year, Seb and Seb going head-to-head around the track in Sweden on snow. And as fast as Seb Vettel is, Seb Loeb will always dominate if the surface is not as sticky as tarmac potentially can be.
If you, like me, somebody who lives overseas but also just wants to watch shows from all over the place and missing out on your favourite shows not available in your region, try to keep your private time private. Campy, looking at you. Well, let me introduce NordVPN. NordVPN allows Campy to watch The Real Housewives of Alabama whenever he wants. But if you're bored with Australian Netflix, easy to do, why not take it for a spin in the US? Using NordVPN and a click of a button, you can do just that. You don't need to travel to Japan or Singapore, which is where our next Grid GP is, for your favourite anime when recording. NordVPN brings it right to you. You can reach 5,000 server options and no show is out of your reach. So using our link, nordvpn.com/Lakeside Drive, you can receive a huge discount on a 2-year plan plus 4 free months. That's 4 free months, Campy, of straight Real Housewives. You can cover OC, Alabama, New York, Florida. I reckon there's maybe a Denver Real Housewives. I don't know. But these are all accessible to you using NordVPN. Plus, part of our binging, we want to keep it private, right? So NordVPN keeps your information encrypted so you never have to worry about your IP or location getting out. And they've also doubled down on keeping you safe with their new threat protection feature. So say goodbye to intrusive website ads and malware, of course. Even if you download an infected file, threat protection kicks in and it deletes it, just like Campy probably wishes he could delete his browsing history. But it makes a mess of your computer, as he will know. But NordVPN is there with its threat protection feature. And all of this is risk-free. Don't forget that there is literally no risk to you with their 30-day money-back guarantee. So give it a try, and if you like it, that's awesome. If you don't, they'll issue a refund and you can pretend the entire situation never even happened. Check out the link in our, where is it? Check out the link up the top, nordvpn.com/Lakeside Drive to get your subscription started today. All right, so let's get into the profile for this week. So as we've mentioned before, the idea of the profiles that we're covering is to really shine a light on some of the people who are a little bit less seen, perhaps in the media, in Formula One. So we have talked about strategists and we've talked about engineers and that type of thing. And this weekend we are talking about Dr. Catherine Richards. So she is the wind tunnel test technician for Mercedes. So a primary element of her role is to run the wind tunnel. The aerodynamicists are essentially her client, and she runs the wind tunnel so they can put performance on the car. So day to day, in terms of her responsibilities, it can go from things like preventative maintenance to assessing wind tunnel data and diagnostics to make sure that everything is working, also doing things like writing and updating processes, and of course running the wind tunnel. So what that means is seeing if their ideas that looked good in the simulators actually work. So as I'm sure we can all piece together pretty quickly, it's a very important job. And ensuring that the tunnel runs accurately is critical, because what they learn in the tunnel can end up on the car. So like any science-based field, research, the results need to be repeatable and of course precise, like everything else that is Formula One. But ultimately, if that's not the case, you can't go and test something, yep, looks good, make it in full size, put it on the car, oh, that's not what we thought was going to happen, back in the tunnel, and you get a different result again. That's just not feasible. So making sure that it is running accurately so that they get precise and repeatable results is really important. But it's not just for that reason, and this is quite an interesting thing that I think we don't talk about potentially enough, is that it's not just for the reasons of efficiency and things like that this is critical, but with other restrictions that are implemented over the last couple of years, there's less wind tunnel time for those top teams in comparison to the bottom teams. So they have to make sure that they get the absolute best out of each run, which maybe is a bit of a digression. We're here to talk about Dr. Catherine Richards, but I thought that was interesting because we do talk a lot about cost caps, for example, affecting a lot of teams' productions and actual parts and other rules and restrictions and that type of thing. But there's also the testing of these products, which is not cost related, but through things like limited time in the tunnels, which also affects their ability to then produce parts in a reasonable speed. So anyway, just a little bit of a sidebar, which I thought was interesting while I was learning a bit about Catherine. But let's get back to her. So one of the reasons I chose Dr. Catherine Richards is that just a few days ago, 17 years ago, she stepped through the gates of what was then BAR Honda. So James, you and I have heard a bit about the behind the scenes of that era when we interviewed Nick Fry, but safe to say she had absolutely no idea what lay ahead. So let's start from the beginning. She grew an interest in kind of STEM subjects, but that was very much peaked when her aunt, the story goes, took her plane spotting at an airport, which does what it says on the tin. There were lots of planes, and she was absolutely hooked on that magic that puts the planes in the air. So at school, she wanted to be a pilot and focused her studies very much on that goal. You're interested in flying, aren't you, James? You'd be happily be a pilot.
I am 1000% as plane spotter, which helps when all I do is spend time at airports at the moment.
Exactly.
But this is really good. This is really interesting. This is honestly really interesting because one of the things that I would say about the wind tunnel before, in your digression, which I think was really good, is that a lot of the time we talk about wind tunnels. We talk about how, last year Williams and Haas would have had more time in the wind tunnel compared to Mercedes and Ferrari and Red Bull. And really that made no difference. But understanding why they need that time and how that time is used, I think, is incredibly important. I think Dr. Catherine Richards' story is phenomenal. What she actually does, how the day-to-day looks for her in that environment, I think is incredibly interesting.
Well, the other thing for her is that she kind of, she's got the end product or end user in terms of the driver and the race car, but it's the aerodynamicists who are actually her client in a way, and it kind of it helped to really understand how all these different parts are connected. She was like, if I can't do my job, if I don't do my job well, then they can't do their job. They can't test parts. They can't then produce parts and all of that stuff. It's just this big chain. And as again, we have these individuals and roles that get a lot of attention, but something like this, if the parts aren't cleaned on the wind tunnel and it's not delivering that reliable and precise performance, then the aerodynamicist's job's impossible, and then the parts aren't getting produced correctly, and then things end up in the car and they don't work as they thought they were going to. And we hear that occasionally, and there's obviously lots of other moving pieces, but that idea of saying, look, it didn't perform in the way that we thought it was going to, and that can be something that comes down to simulator, it can be something that comes down to wind tunnel production, all sorts of things. But she looks at planes and she goes, yep, that's what I'm going to do. So she went off and studied. So off she goes to college, studies aerospace. I just love that kind of step of going, yeah, I thought planes were really awesome. I want to fly planes. I'm going to go study aerospace because I'm an absolute genius. And in that process starts learning about aerodynamics, which in her world, enter the wind tunnel. Don't actually enter it. It'll end really badly. But wind tunnels in her world, in terms of how they kind of came into the picture, was actually the fact that they were initially designed for aircraft. So it makes sense that kind of that's where her journey began. But it was also around this time that she started following Formula One a little bit more closely, and her dad took her to Silverstone. She said, I don't know why he had hospitality tickets, but he did, and we had a great day, and I thought this sport was really cool. But it was also kind of during that era of Michael Schumacher's dominance, and that dominance, that dominating performance, is really what sustained her attention. So according to her, it is Michael Schumacher's brilliance that is to blame for the role that she's in at the moment, because through that she learned that you can put a Formula One car in a wind tunnel. And she was like, whoa, wait a second, I want to do that. So planes are cool, but do you know Formula One cars can go in wind tunnels? And she started to kind of look elsewhere in terms of how she could apply her skills, focus her studies, and potentially go into Formula One. Now, this is when an Australian enters the story, as they always do, just being the legends that they are.
Good link. I like it.
In this scenario, it is Willem Toet. So he is an Aussie F1 aerodynamicist. He's also now a senior sales manager and aerodynamics consultant for Sauber and therefore obviously Alfa Romeo. So she wrote a letter and said, I want to come and see the Benetton factory. In particular, I want to see the wind tunnels. And Willem picked up that letter and said, yeah, come along. I'm doing a tour for some mates. Bring a friend. And it was, as they say, it'll all go from there. But the way she kind of puts it, she's like, well, okay, so Michael Schumacher really started this whole thing, but then it was Willem who has to take the rest of the blame for being an incredible incredibly supportive mentor. In fact, Dr. Richards says, if it hadn't been for him, I wouldn't be where I am today. He became my mentor. He became a close friend. He had the faith and belief in me and supported me through all of my studies and beyond. So off she goes again, and she gets her degree in aerospace engineering, and then off she goes again and she gets a PhD in vehicle aerodynamics. Just, you know that there's a phenomenal brain there. And I love how these things, and you read through the research and the interviews with her, it's like, oh yeah, so then I went and did my PhD, as you do.
This is one of the things that I love about this segment, and why I'm so glad that it's staying, is that there's so many cool and interesting people, more interesting more often than not than the drivers, who are behind the scenes, well behind the scenes, helping teams achieve success. And, you know, there's thousands of people across all 10 teams and the FIA itself doing amazing things. People like Dr. Richards. It's incredible. It's really, really incredible.
It is, and I just love how, you know, when you get those types of people where you go, I could really apply my brain and the way it works to so many different things, and they've chosen Formula One. And to me, that is a real intersection of passion for the sport combined with, you know, your strengths, combined with what you're good at, in terms of, you know, where your natural strengths lie, and then your learned skills through, whether it's, you know, your degrees or anything else. It's that perfect kind of meeting of those different areas. And we talked about that with Hannah Schmitz and the way that she describes herself. She's like, I'm a planner. I plan for every scenario at home. Well, guess what? That works really well in a Formula One scenario as well. So I love reading about and learning about these people, because they are people who are absolutely kind of following their dream, and they've found this world where all of those skills intersect, which is really cool. So on a day-to-day basis, Dr. Richards kind of says that she loves everything about her job. You know, she's like, I get to play with a model F1 car and this amazing wind tunnel. And I also know that I play a critical role in the success or failure of this team. Now, for her, she's had far more successes than she has failures, contributing to consecutive 8 World Championships at Mercedes, which I'm sure is very motivating as well. But despite the run of wins at Mercedes, it's actually the Brawn GP that she kind of recounts as her career highlight. A fairy tale year, as she describes, that against all odds saw Jenson Button to win the Drivers' Championship, and then the team as well in Constructors. And of course, in doing so, taking both titles in its only year of competition, became the first to achieve 100% championship success rate, which is just one of those great statistics.
Mental to also think that, we're talking about the contract recognition board, Jenson Button was trying to get to Williams and the contract recognition board said no. And so he ended up staying at what became a championship winning team in Brawn GP. And if he had gone to Williams, then Rubens Barrichello would be a world champion. Just think about that for a moment. I mean, that's, I hate the term sliding doors moment, but there is one.
You do hate that term, don't you? But at the end of every season, there is exactly that. And I think, again, through looking at these different people who are involved in the sports, it's not just the drivers who that affects. It's, you know, people like Dr. Catherine Richards, who, you know, may work for this team or that team and therefore have no world championships or have 8. You know, it affects everybody who is part of that organisation. But like we do like to cover when it comes to chatting about women in particular who are working in Formula One, I was interested in what her experience was as being a female working in the sport. Now, researching for this profile, Dr. Catherine Richards reminds me a lot on paper of somebody you and I have met, James, who is Karen Bowling, who is the Control Systems Production Team Lead at McLaren Applied, whereby being the only woman in her department just doesn't bother her. She's gone like, I'm an excellent professional at what I do. Who cares what gender I am? It just doesn't bother me. And the other thing is that she was actually asked in an interview, you know, what are you yet to achieve? What is something that you still want to accomplish in your role? And much like Karen, and again, this just tells me how passionate they are about what they're doing, is her response was, no, I love my job, thank you, which is also a similar response to what we heard from Karen. So just really interesting, to see people in similar types of roles when it comes to those STEM-focused positions. just loving what they do and loving being a part of a high-performing team. But what she does recognise is that she can contribute to helping increase the education level of women in engineering courses. So she's an ambassador for Dare to be Different, which is the charity founded by Susie Wolf, who crops up a lot in these profiles as somebody who is a mentor, somebody who is inspiring others and working closely with them to try and propel, in particular, women working in motorsport. And through Dare to be Different, aiming to inspire the next generation of female talent and connect young girls with female mentors already in the motorsport industry. So just a quick stat there, only about 16% of students graduating from engineering and technology courses in the UK are actually women at the moment. So when Dr. Richards is asked about the challenges or the hurdles, she's kind of gone, the opportunities are there. We are at a point where we are starting to break down that preconception that motorsport is only for men. It's more about increasing the level of education of women in STEM technology. So that's where she's applying her efforts. And she kind of said, look, the logic fits. If women aren't studying engineering, then the employers can't recruit them. So employers, schools and universities, kind of these three stages of education and then employment, need to work together to create that pipeline. And that's where initiatives like Dare to be Different come in, which is why she has decided to be an ambassador for that charity. And she's also said, what else motivates me to do that? Well, I was given this opportunity. The way Willem picked me up and said, you can do this. Somebody gave me an opportunity. They had faith in me, and I want to provide that opportunity to somebody else to help them follow their dream. And she recognises that it's a really difficult sport to get into, and that's why she is doing it, because she said, not everybody knows somebody to connect them with a team or with a business. Not everybody has come from a motorsport background or family. They're out there on their own trying to find their way in, and she wants to help those people. So as an employer, she's doing that by taking on women for placements and work experience with the hope that there'll be more of them coming through. So I just thought it's always very interesting to learn about women who are particularly in these senior roles and what their experience has been, because it's very easy to make an assumption, and what they share might actually be quite different.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And one of the things that I've noticed a lot recently as well, and Karen and a lot of the engineers and designers at McLaren Applied across all the different segments of the business would say similar things, that they're very happy to be able to talk to people and give people an understanding of exactly what it is the role is that maybe they're looking for, or answer questions. And certainly here in the UK, there's a huge movement in that space in the FIA's Women in Motorsport program, which is doing an incredible job, and that's sort of going out wider across the world now as well too. But one of the things I would say to anyone listening to this podcast, regardless of the industry that you want to go in, talking about Dr. Richards specifically, of course, you can find out more about how to get in touch with her probably through various different websites. In fact, we'll find the website link actually to probably get in touch with her through the right means and put that into the description below. But is just go on to LinkedIn and try and find people, or Instagram, and direct message them, because that's what you and I do.
Yeah.
And there is a certain level of success in that. And podcasting is all made up. This is not a real thing. But if you're actually genuinely interested and have the interest, regardless of who you are or where you're from around the world, there's opportunities to work in Formula One. And what I would say is that there is a new content creator who's on the scene, Break, who he is a US guy who moved to England. He ended up working for Red Bull as an engineer, and he's since left Red Bull and started his own content creation company, doing bits and pieces and live streaming some podcasts as well. But the last couple of weeks, he's been putting pieces of work together, basically saying this is how you get into Formula One. So if this is an interest of yours specifically, and you look at planes and you go, I want them to be on the ground, right, and not let them take off at all when it comes to aerodynamics, that's the job for me. It's a good way of getting involved with it. But I think people like Karen's phenomenal for her and Catherine to be able to offer themselves up to say, look, if you've got questions, ask us. We're here to be asked. I think the stigma of trying to get into Formula One is this beautiful, shiny thing and paddock passes and all that sort of other stuff. It's not like that at all. It's very hard work, no matter who you are up and down the paddock. But you don't have to go to an event to make an incredibly huge difference. And Dr. Richards is an incredible example of someone who does that week in, week out for almost over a decade now, for a championship, for multiple championship winning teams, we can say.
Oh, absolutely. And I have to say, like, her letter writing story did remind me a bit of your email sending stories, although I might suggest that she'd had fewer beers when she wrote her letter. Otherwise, Willem might not have been able to interpret. Yeah, I was going to say she probably hadn't
had 6 beers.
But hey, if it works.
Dutch courage. There you go. That's the Dutch thing that I like.
Exactly. Okay, see, you can have the cheese. But it's interesting, like you said, this is a notoriously...
Hang on a second. No, we're not going to move on from this. I need to go back. This is ridiculous. I refuse to move on from this. Firstly, I'm not moving on from my laziness. Whatever this text messages that you sent in the group chat between all the presenters, what is it specifically is this one of the few only things that you can remember in Dutch that you could quip in such a short period of time back to me and Tommy? Was that it?
Pretty much. No, well, I was thinking, like, what is something about the Dutch culture that you would appreciate or enjoy? And I'm like, well, you don't wear clogs, unlikely. I don't think you're trying to build a windmill in your backyard. You do probably like stroopwafels, so I could have used that as an example, but they get enough attention either anyway. So I was like, well, cheese. We make great cheese. And do you know what? If you're going to keep having a go at the Dutch like this, well, then you can't have it. And that's the one thing I could remember to say in Dutch quite quickly. That is also a reason. But, yeah.
Love it. It was outstanding. It was outstanding payout. I'm all about it. Also because it completely confused Campy, which is not unusual
what
at the
was
moment.
That? That's every...
I mean, did you hear his last episode thing? Oh, I'm an expert in whatever that music's called, opera. Oh, my God. Yeah. What is this show even becoming? Anyway, please do move on.
This show is becoming Campy's fitness podcast. That's what it's becoming. Like how to learn to swim in the bin.
Not a mental image that anyone... I'm saying, can I also just apologise? I want to apologise specifically to one person who is an employee of a friend of the show who was listening in the car, and this work colleague could not get over the heavy breathing that is consistent. Let me just say this, Campy, if you're listening to this, there is an easy way to stop that. Just get off the microphone. You see, you can still talk. The microphone is away from here. Stop being lazy. Move away from it. The breathing is ridiculous to edit. Anyway, he's probably not going to listen to this, which just shows some respect, Campy.
Go take a swim, and that will help with your breathing. It's you have to control it. We could be onto something here, James. I don't know. Anyway, let's keep talking about way more impressive people like Dr. Catherine Richards.
Keeping lifeguards Victoria in employment.
How did we end up here? Where were we? Formula One, very difficult to work in. She's there to help new women. How phenomenal is that? Now, what else do we need to know about her job? She is talking about key attributes as to what it takes to be a wind tunnel test technician. And she describes the need to be focused, thorough, and adaptable. Now, we talked a little bit about this with Tommy in terms of going, there are so many roles here where you need so many different parts of your brain that are kind of in conflict with each other. We talk about this in terms of being focused and thorough, but also adaptable, and I just, again, when it comes to the abilities of people working in this sport, I just, will never stop being amazed. And the other thing here as well is that there's no, like podcasting, I mean, it is like podcasting. There's no tailored qualification. There's no tailored qualification for being a wind tunnel test technician. You just have to go and figure out how to get there. It just requires that good background knowledge, willingness to learn and work hard, and learn hard too. Like I said, just like podcasting.
It's going well.
Somebody stop me. I've had too much coffee to counteract the drowsy antihistamines.
Look, it's going well. Look, I think the key point as I rescue the ship, as what I'm going to update on the website, my profile on the bio, where we say James rescues ships of the shows, is that You and
I think
Tommy
you'll
T
find in
criticised the
actually
Italians
our
for
review.
saying an
No,
Italian
we're going back.
word.
We're going
So
back.
I'm
Stop. We're going back.
absolutely putting a 10-second time penalty on both of you for that. And also,
I'm pretty
Italian
sure
Jesus chopped his hair off. So can we still call him Italian Jesus? These are 2 points that are very important to have clarification on.
You may be
including what the name of the show is.
You may be the rescuer of ships, but I am the rescuer of train wrecks. Never forget the review that we had where you are an F1 flog and the woman rescues the train wreck, okay? So you might feel like you're saving a ship,
true.
but it's not a ship, it's a train, and I'm here to save it. So, it's fine. Also, Tommy wasn't saying that the Italians can't use Italian words. He was saying that we will get sick of Crofty and other people saying tifosi, and the fact that it just sounds weird when we say it over and over and over and over again.
I think you're absolutely right.
Of course I am.
What he was saying constantly was tifosi. It's just tifosi. It was like, you are butchering the language. You are having a bad crack anyway. It was amazed that he could tell the two helmets apart between the two Ferrari yellow helmets because he always struggles with that. But anyway, I'm still putting a 10-second time penalty on both of you for just having way too much fun. Ridiculous. How dare you? It was a very good show, and I really enjoyed listening to it. So 20-second time penalty for you for next week.
Fine, I'll cop that. I'll just sit quietly for 20 seconds and then have to speak really quickly to make up for it, which I'm doing a very good job of right now, to be honest. But I have 2 more anecdotes that I wanted to share when it comes to the person who we're actually here to talk about, which surprisingly is not Tommy T, can't be you or me. It was actually Dr. Richards.
Disappointing.
So there's 2 more anecdotes which I thought were funny and would be good ones to end on. One is that in 2017, she was asked in an interview for Females in Motorsport, if you had a team, which 2 drivers would you choose? And this was her response. Lewis, definitely. Then Valtteri's good, but I think I would have Max, but I don't think they would work well together. If I could and they would, I think that would be an unbeatable combination. Lewis and Valtteri get on really, really well, and Max and Daniel get on really, really well. So sometimes you have to think about the personalities as well. Otherwise, it can make a really awkward working environment if they don't get on. Thoughts, James?
No, I think it'd be fine. Strap both in the same car. Let's have a 3-team car and put Charles Leclerc as the 3rd driver and just see what happens. I mean, every other team and every other driver would be able to win because they would be too busy imploding as a team. Hashtag never forget Nico Rosberg.
Yeah, exactly. It's like we've seen what can happen then when exactly that plays out. And the last anecdote, research from Dr. Catherine Richards is that, talking about LinkedIn, which you raised earlier, in 2022, you look at her profile and there is one influencer listed that she follows on LinkedIn. Guess who it is?
Chief of Optimism at Optus.
That is the one and only DR. I'm sorry. If the Mercedes...
Are you kidding, really?
No, I'm not kidding. That's it. It's Daniel Ricciardo. No.
Wow.
So
that's the whole show for the whole year. Thank you so much for listening.
It tells me everything we need to know. I'm sorry. The Mercedes wind tunnel technician, I literally cannot speak, follows one person, or not one person, one influencer, categorized as influencer on LinkedIn, and it's Daniel Ricciardo, Chief Optimism Officer. So there you have it. Hats
off to that decision.
Yeah, 100%. All right, that is it for this week. Goodness, I don't know how we got to this point. So thanks for listening to my ramblings, and James, welcome back. I don't know who will be joining me next time. Manus, you could be up. We just need to get you off childminding duty to try and get you some recording equipment. But that is it.
And out of the regional Victorian bushland.
Exactly. There's always something unexpected, but it's funny. All right, that's it for this week. Don't forget you can support the show by either subscribing to our YouTube channel, you can pick up some merchandise, NordVPN subscription, or by jumping onto our Patreon link via the link in our bio. Thanks, James.
Thanks, mate.
See ya.